The Nintendo Switch has been a game changer in many regards, with millions of copies sold for almost every title that hits the platform. But what if I told you that this success story might have a dark side? Today, we're diving into the hidden consequences of the Switch effect, and why Nintendo's biggest strength might also be at the detriment of the consumer later on, and also their reputation. So to start, for those of you who don't know, let's talk about what even is the Switch effect. Luckily, it's not really a hard concept to grasp. Basically, when you compare the sales of the games from franchises on other platforms compared to those on Switch, you can see that the games on Switch have sold, a bit more. And that's just being modest, of course. Because you can look at series like The Legend of Zelda, Splatoon, even Fire Emblem, and for each of these franchises, they had their best-selling game on Switch. But even if you exclude new games, because of course new games as they get more popular will sell more, even ports of games are selling more than the originals. Of course, this is most likely just due because of how successful the Switch is on its own, but when people talk about the Switch effect, that's what they mean. And of course, don't get me wrong, this is all fantastic stuff. Especially for Nintendo, considering the last time that I checked, there was 69 games that have sold more than 1 million units. Which as a Nintendo fan is really cool to say because I feel like Nintendo's never been taken seriously that much in the gaming industry as a whole. Of course, back in the day, Nintendo really pioneered the gaming industry, but I feel like in recent years before the Switch, Nintendo kind of not necessarily lost their way, but was mostly just perceived as the console for children. And if you're not a child, there's no really real reason for you to play it because, Call of Duty's not there, ooh. But now that the sun is setting on the Switch generation, I kind of removed my rose-colored glasses and started to worry about a couple of things that might affect us in the future. And of course, I'm no Nostradamus, so I can't predict exactly what's going to happen. And either way, even if I was Nostradamus, I don't think I'd get it right anyways. The first thing that gets me worried is the games, specifically the quality versus the quantity. Nintendo is not dumb. And they most likely realized that a lot of the games that were coming out for Switch were selling like hotcakes. So I really wouldn't be surprised if Nintendo would want to try to capitalize on the Switch effect for the next console, meaning getting as many of the bigger hitting titles out at the beginning of the lifespan of the next console generation. Meaning these games get to become evergreen titles, and these titles for Nintendo can bring in money throughout the entire generation. But here's the thing, there's one line of games that came out on the Switch that really dropped the ball each time they came out, and those games were the Mario sports games. As most of us know, the Mario sports games kind of came out rough. Not rough as in buggy, more rough as in, there's kind of nothing to do. Whether it be modes missing or a lack of characters in the roster, you name it, the game just felt kind of empty. But of course, Nintendo would over time release new patches for the game or new updates for free, free, releasing all the things I already mentioned. And I know Nintendo was just using the word free update to kind of like imply that, oh look, it's like free DLC. We're gonna give you free content, free. Because to them, it makes the consumer feel like they're getting more value for what they're paying for. But I think the illusion was shattered for a lot of people because a lot of us know that if you're already showing DLC for the game that's not even out yet, before it's out, that extra content is not content that was, unable to make the cut in time to get there. It was content that was explicitly cut on purpose and held back. Nintendo first did this with Mario Tennis Aces, then they did it again with Mario Golf Super Rush, and then they did it a third time with Mario Strikers. And as much as I want to say that this isn't a pattern and Nintendo's going to learn from their mistakes and not do it again, they did do it again with Switch Sports, because when the game was coming out, they kind of already had promised that golf was going to be coming at a later date. So now the problem is extending beyond the Mario Sports series. I mean, it's still a sports game, but what happens if they expand this to different types of games? And my only worry is that in the next console generation, Nintendo is going to start, doing this more and more, favoring getting the games out sooner so that they can have more sales, and then going on and finishing the games later. The next negative side effect I'd like to talk about is the spike in popularity in a lot of franchises. There's a lot of good things that do come out of this, massive spike in popularity for these franchises. For example, now it kind of just proves to Nintendo that even though that maybe a game didn't sell well at first, but it can turn around and be a big seller down the line. Like, look at Fire Emblem for example. Fire Emblem Awakening was supposed to be the last game in the franchise. However, good sales did save it. Then we saw, Birthright and Conquest, or Fire Emblem Fates as we call it, that also released on the 3DS, and Shadows of Valentia. But after that, Fire Emblem Three Houses quickly became one of the best-selling, not one of, the actual best-selling Fire Emblem game of all time, selling 4.12 million copies, which is almost 2 million more than Fire Emblem Awakening. So why do I bring this up? Well, there has never been as many Fire Emblem fans as there are right now. And personally, I am a huge Fire Emblem fan too, so I'm very happy to see this. However, this kind of causes an issue. Because now that there are so many Fire Emblem fans out there, looking into the history of the franchise, looking at what other games there are out there. Because, there's only two really traditional Fire Emblem games on the Switch. There's Fire Emblem Three Houses and Fire Emblem Engage. Of course, the Fire Emblem Warriors game don't count. And I'm sure there's Fire Emblem fans out there that played both of these games, and their debut to Fire Emblem was one or the other of these games, and are now finding themselves turning to the internet to find used copies of older games in the series. But like I said, Fire Emblem has never really been a big seller. Meaning, when you go on places like eBay or secondhand stores, there's not that many copies out there versus the huge fan base that these series have now. Just as an example, let me poke at Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn. Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn was the Fire Emblem game for the Wii, which was a follow-up to the one for the GameCube, Path of Radiance. This game, and keep in mind this is worldwide, sold just under a measly 408,000 units. And here's my problem with all of this. If you think about it, there's less than 500,000 copies out there of this game. And of these games, there's some that are probably broken or in the dump and you'll never find them again. They're just gone. So the number of games out there are less than what I just said. And then yet again, there's some people, like me, just as an example of course, that already have this game. Like, I have it, it's in my collection, and that game is not going to be put on the market again. Meaning the total number of the copy of games of this specific game that will ever be put back on the market for sale is quite low. And once you contrast that with the ever-growing fandom, that is going to create a rarity around this game. And unfortunately, when you have something that is rare, it jacks up the price. Cause what the hell is this? I bought my copy of the game for $60 at a used game store. And that was just a couple of years ago too. And the funny part about this is this game isn't the most expensive in the franchise. Here's some homework for you after the video. Go look at Fire Emblem Path of Radiance on eBay to see how much people are selling it for. I'm just glad I have my copy already, cause oof. Because at the same game store I just talked about, look what I found the other day. Yikes. And of course, if you pair this with Nintendo's problem with having their older games just accessible for people to buy, I'm not gonna go really too much in depth with it because, realistically this could be its own video in itself, which makes everything more complicated for the consumer to truly indulge in the series they enjoy. But before we move on, I have a very short message. If this is your first time here, hey, my name's Acadrien and I post weekly Nintendo videos. So if that sounds like something you'd enjoy, I would greatly appreciate it if you would consider to like and subscribe, and without further ado, let's go right back into the video. The final point I would like to address is the damage that could be caused by the rise of expectations. Once again, it's really no secret that the Switch has done marvels for Nintendo, and people really have been enjoying this console a lot, and they've been buying game after game after game for it, and they've been using their Switch and not just letting it collect dust. And although this is all positive, this could truly warp expectations. The Switch effect might create an environment where the high sale numbers are expected for every game release on the platform, regardless of the game's scope or the target audience. And of course, I mean that in the general sense, because clearly Nintendo doesn't believe a game like, for instance, Metroid Dread is going to sell as much as Mario Wonder. So there already is, a variation in expectations and sales for these types of games. But let's take a franchise like Pikmin. Overall, Pikmin sold pretty good on Switch, but let's say the successor console comes around. And let's be real, Nintendo is most likely going to release Pikmin 5 for that console. But if this Pikmin 5 game does not reach the sales potential that they expected because of what it did in the past, does that mean they have to second guess whether Pikmin is worth bringing back or not? In other words, what I'm trying to say is this. This could put undue pressure on developers to meet these expectations, potentially leading to disappointment and financial difficulties if a game doesn't perform as well as it was anticipated. Also, this of course could lead to fewer risks being taken on smaller, innovative titles that don't have the same sales potential as a result. But now I'm curious and I want to hear from you. Can you think of any other negative side effects that the Switch effect could have had on Nintendo as a whole? I'd be curious to see what you guys come up with, so please let me know down in the comments. And until next time, warao.